Honeybees are constantly engaged in nest maintenance. They're constantly trimming the wax off of cells. They're capping cells of honey. They're capping brood cells and constructing brood cells. It's a constant, ongoing activity, as you can see here in this particular video. They also store food. Another way of insulating yourself from the environment is by storing a lot of food. So, you could insulate yourself from the cold winters in northern Wisconsin if you didn't have to go out to the store to buy food. If you brought food in and you stored it in your cupboards in your basement or whatever, you wouldn't have to leave. So you would insulate yourself from the environment by having food stores available. Foragers go out, they collect pollen and nectar from flowers. They bring the nectar back and they process it into honey. And it takes about 55,000 miles of bee flight to produce 1 pound of honey, which is pretty amazing. And they store the pollen in combs, and then the pollen is ingested by the young bees that are less than about 2 weeks old, and they convert the pollen proteins into proteinaceous glandular secretions that they then feed to developing larvae. They thermoregulate the nest. That's another way. They can insulate themselves from the heat outside by fanning at the entrance. When the temperature rises to a level that is getting to be intolerable for the bees, then they will go collect water. They'll bring water back into the nest. They'll put the water in strategic places around the nest, and then they'll start up fanning, and they'll generate an airflow that will then flow through the nest, and along with the water that they've already collected and strategically placed the droplets around, will cool the nest, similar to swamp coolers that you can see still to this day on top of people's houses. It's a similar process. When it gets too cold, they thermoregulate by forming a ball inside of the nest. The combs go here, but they still form a cluster, and then they vibrate their wing muscles, which generates heat. So they can generate a little bit of heat, and then their bodies insulate this sphere and can control the center of this from becoming too cold. They also, inside of the nest that they've engineered, have health protection. They're shielding themselves from the dangers of external parasites and pathogens that might be invading the nest and killing the larvae and killing the adults. They have many different mechanisms. Here's just three. They have undertaking behavior, where dead bees, or bees that die inside the nest, are dragged out by we call these the undertaker bees, but they drag them out of the nest, and then they will fly through the air with the bodies and drop the bodies maybe 100, 200 meters away. So they're eliminating a source of the pathogen that kills bees. So they keep a sanitary house by getting rid of individuals that are dead. They also have hygienic behavior. Hygienic behavior is when underneath a cell, they can recognize if the pupa that's under the capping of a cell. So they cap the brood with solid cappings. Underneath the capping, then the larva will develop into a pupa, and then they can detect if that pupa is not alive underneath that capping. Then they can remove the capping, and then they can take the pupa out and get rid of it. Again, eliminating the pathogen from the nest. And they're constantly engaged in grooming behavior. They groom themselves, they groom each other, and part of the grooming behavior is picking off parasites that might be on the bodies of their nestmates. Bees also have a nestmate recognition system. Colonies of bees are social kleptomaniacs. Any colony that gets weak, if a stronger colony discovers it, that stronger colony will come and invade it and will steal their honey. So, and there are other insect species that will invade honeybee colonies and steal their brood or their honey. So they have a defensive system. This defensive system is based on recognizing who your nestmates are and who aren't your nestmates. So individuals within a colony will share common recognition cues, which are cues that they've picked up from their nest environment. So they smell like they belong there. The nestmate recognition activity is undertaken by guard bees. Guard bees is a special task group. They're individuals who sit at the entrance of the nest, and they're typically you can see them by the front legs are lifted up off the substrate. They're sitting on their hind two pairs of legs. Their mandibles will be slightly apart, and their wings will be not folded over their backs, but offset like this. So as individuals come back to the nest from a foraging trip or whatever, they'll engage the guard bee. Here's the guard bee right here. You can see her behavior. And as they come in, the guards will run over to them and will check them out, antenate them as there, and make sure that they belong. If they don't belong, then they will reject them from the nest, either by grasping them with their mandibles and tugging them away, or sometimes they will actually sting them. Colonies also have a dramatic defensive system protecting the colony against larger predators like us, bears or whatever, where they can mount a huge defensive response to sting intruders, even to the point that can be lethal for a horse. This horse right here was not trying to get anything from the bees, but it got too close to this particular colony. And unfortunately, this was in Mexico, and the horse was tethered and couldn't get away. And so the bees stung it to death. But they have an amazing defensive response to protect their resources. Again, they're protecting themselves against the external environment. Niche construction is when the activities of bees affect their own reproduction and survival or that of their descendants. So now we're going to talk about descendants. An obvious one is gifting the nest. The half of the colony that went and founded the new nest went and built combs and had a demolition project and lined the space with propolis, etc. But the other half stayed behind. This part over here has the old queen. This one here has a young virgin. The young virgin inherits all of this. She gets the wax comb, which we saw is very expensive to make. There's larvae in there. There's broods. Her sister workers that have been produced. There's pollen. There's honey. She gets all of this. This has been gifted to her by the bees that left. So the bees that left gifted this to the new young queen. So this is building something, constructing a niche that you leave for someone who's related to you. And in the end, she gets all of this, and there can only be one, because the queens fight to the death, and the one surviving wins it, and that's hers. So we've talked about niche construction activities that insulate bees from the external environment. And we just talked about it when it's affecting descendants. It's the same thing. They were activities that insulate the descendants from the environment. There's also activities that change the external environment to make it more beneficial. This is the tough one. This is the difficult one, because we have to distinguish between activities that are just exploiting the resources that are there, as opposed to activities that are actually producing something that's going to benefit the colony in the future or the descendants of the colony in the future. So niche construction is recognized as two different ways of having niche construction. One is the activities that insulate them from the external environment, which we were just talking about. And the other are activities that change the external environment to make it more beneficial. So in one case, you're insulating yourself from that environment. In the other case, you're changing that environment to make it more beneficial to you. This is difficult to distinguish, because distinguishing between exploiting a resource or engaging in niche construction, you have to show that the activity, along with the niche construction, is something that is investing in the future, as opposed to just exploiting the resources in the immediate term. And there are no real accepted examples of that. But where we might look for it, if we were to look for and try to demonstrate some kind of niche construction based on future investment, looking at the high level of fidelity that bees show to given resources. In some ways, that it may benefit the crop to show, or the patch of plants where they're foraging, it may benefit them to have a high fidelity to come back and pollinate. But at the same time, they may be sacrificing the opportunity to forage for other plant species that might be right there and close by and profitable, where they might lose some potential profitability by continuing to revisit the same plant variety or plant species over and over again. Bees also show a preference for foraging on rare resources. The rare resources are often less valuable, but they still will go visit those rare resources. And why? I mean, you could say, well, they need a more diverse diet. On the other hand, it may be by visiting those rare resources, they're investing in the future and that they're pollinating plants that will drop seeds and developing a new patch with a new variety. Recruiting errors. When they do their recruitment dances, like we talked about in the first series, when they're doing their recruitment dances, they're giving information to potential recruits as to where they can go and find the resource that they were foraging on. Well, those errors could misguide individuals, potential foragers, could misguide them to go to new places and discover new resources that could then be exploited in the future. The other is scouting behavior. They engage in scouting behavior even when there are lots of resources out there on which they could be foraging. They could be exploiting a resource, but many of the bees don't get recruited to those resources. They go out instead and they scout for new resources. Now, are they scouting for new resources because they're hedging their bets because the other resources are going to dry out and they need to go to new ones? Well, that would be exploiting. Or are they scouting and engaging in niche construction by foraging to those places and pollinating those flowers and building seed that can then be used in the future as sources for forage?